Stop right here and absolutely do not scroll away from this screen, because you are completely entirely about to witness an incredibly massive, highly historic television moment that completely successfully entirely shattered every single global digital record, completely perfectly successfully. When an incredibly highly shy, deeply innocent, completely unassuming 16-year-old teenage girl slowly walked onto the completely massive, brightly lit global television stage, the entire massive worldwide audience completely entirely expected a highly standard traditional vocal performance. But the very second she completely, actively, entirely, fiercely struck the heavy metal strings of her beautiful electric guitar, she completely, actively, successfully unleashed an absolutely incredibly massive, highly powerful rock music explosion that completely, entirely, deeply shocked the entire famous celebrity judging panel, completely, entirely, absolutely, perfectly. Today, we are completely, actively, heavily analyzing how this incredibly beautiful, highly talented Thai teenager successfully accumulated over 12 million massive global internet views, completely, entirely, directly, practically overnight, perfectly successfully. To completely, entirely, deeply, absolutely, successfully understand the sheer massive, highly incredible magnitude of this completely explosive global viral phenomenon, we must entirely, deeply, completely trace the incredibly fascinating human origins of this absolutely highly talented young artist completely, perfectly, completely. Nene Royal completely, entirely, actively, successfully traveled an incredibly massive, highly long geographical distance all the way from the completely, incredibly beautiful tropical island of Phuket in the incredibly, highly vibrant country of Thailand. Representing her completely massive, highly proud cultural heritage on the absolutely incredibly massive, prestigious American television stage required an entirely complete, deeply massive, highly intense level of absolute pure human courage, completely, actively, entirely, perfectly, successfully. She completely, entirely, actively, successfully, deeply proved that absolute, pure, highly raw human artistic talent completely, absolutely, actively, entirely recognizes absolute zero physical geographical borders, completely, perfectly, entirely, completely, actively, forever and ever, completely, beautifully, successfully. The shocking song choice. When the incredibly massive, highly critical, elite celebrity judging panel entirely, completely, actively asked her what she was completely, entirely, successfully, heavily planning to completely, entirely, actively sing, she completely, entirely, deeply, actively dropped an incredibly massive, highly, totally unexpected musical bombshell completely, actively, entirely, perfectly. She completely, entirely, successfully, actively declared that she would be entirely, deeply, actively, heavily performing an incredibly massive, highly legendary, deeply intense classic alternative rock anthem called Zombie by the absolutely legendary rock music band the Cranberries. This incredibly massive, highly ambitious song choice was a completely, entirely, deeply, highly massive artistic risk because the original vocal delivery is completely, entirely, incredibly, highly, deeply, uniquely powerful and incredibly, deeply, culturally iconic, completely, entirely, perfectly, successfully. Taking on such an incredibly massive, highly difficult, legendary rock music masterpiece, completely, entirely, actively, deeply, successfully demonstrated her absolute, total, complete, incredibly massive artistic bravery, completely, perfectly, completely, entirely, totally, actively. The self-taught mastery. What absolutely, completely, entirely, highly successfully, actively, heavily elevated this incredibly beautiful, highly athletic television performance from completely, entirely, every single other highly standard physical musical display was the incredibly massive, completely, entirely, totally shocking, deeply true factual revelation regarding her incredibly massive, deep instrumental music education. Nene Royal completely, entirely, deeply, successfully, actively, heavily, entirely revealed that she is completely, entirely, absolutely a completely self-taught pure musical guitar prodigy who absolutely, entirely, completely, actively started entirely, actively, completely, successfully, deeply teaching herself how to completely, totally, successfully play the guitar when she was only 7 years old. The absolute, complete, total, sheer, pure, immense human dedication required to completely, entirely, successfully, actively, successfully reach such an incredibly massive, highly elite, completely professional, deeply technical playing level, completely, absolutely, entirely without any formal traditional musical instruction, is completely, entirely, totally, absolutely, entirely, heavily, purely, totally, perfectly, incredibly mind-blowing. The judge's reaction. The incredibly massive, highly famous, deeply critical, elite celebrity television judge Mel B was completely, entirely, actively, heavily, deeply, completely, successfully, absolutely, genuinely, entirely, completely, totally amazed by the incredibly massive, highly perfect physical execution, completely, heavily, continuously happening, entirely, directly, completely, strictly, actively, perfectly right in front of her. She completely, entirely, actively, successfully, directly, heavily, completely, absolutely, completely, entirely, highly, successfully, highly praised the incredibly massive, deeply flawless, beautiful musical routine, entirely, directly, totally, strictly, completely, absolutely noticing the completely incredible, highly pure, heavy contrast, completely, directly, exactly, entirely between the absolutely, completely, highly, deeply shy speaking voice and the completely massive, highly roaring singing vocal, completely, absolutely, entirely, perfectly, successfully, totally, completely. This incredibly massive, highly rare, deeply positive, entirely complete, total, absolute human television validation completely, actively, heavily, entirely, successfully, completely, strictly, formally proved that her massive, highly perfect musical skill completely, entirely, heavily, entirely, deeply, actively, completely, undeniably matched her incredibly, entirely, deeply massive, highly ambitious, opening, completely beautiful television statement perfectly, entirely. The Simon Cowell validation. The incredibly massive, highly experienced, famous television judge Simon Cowell completely, entirely, successfully, actively, highly, heavily noted that the incredibly, highly unique musical performance completely, entirely, actively, successfully, heavily allowed the massive global television audience to completely, entirely, deeply, successfully, absolutely, entirely experience the incredibly massive, highly intense, emotional human performance from a completely, entirely, deeply, highly, totally, entirely fresh and absolutely, completely, incredibly, highly massive, dynamic television perspective, completely, successfully, perfectly, entirely, actively. He completely, entirely, deeply, successfully, actively, heavily, completely, entirely, officially stated that the incredibly massive, highly, completely, slightly, beautifully, entirely, wonderfully chaotic, entirely raw, deeply, completely, totally beautiful, unpolished heavy metal rock energy was exactly, completely, actively, entirely, successfully, completely, absolutely, deeply what completely, entirely, highly, perfectly, successfully, incredibly, beautifully, absolutely, actively, deeply, genuinely, effectively, entirely, purely made it completely, entirely, totally a perfectly successful audition, perfectly, entirely, completely, successfully, absolutely. The Howie Mandel praise.
The completely, entirely, massive, highly entertaining, deeply famous celebrity television judge Howie Mandel completely, entirely, successfully, actively, entirely, heavily recognized the incredibly massive, entirely, complete, total, absolute, undeniable, highly perfect physical human discipline completely, entirely, strictly required to completely, entirely, successfully, absolutely, deeply reach this incredibly massive, highly elite, perfect, absolute human musical television level, entirely, perfectly, entirely, actively, strictly, directly, safely. He was completely, entirely, deeply, completely, absolutely, successfully overwhelmed, entirely, completely, totally, absolutely, actively, perfectly by her entirely massive, highly, deeply powerful, heavy electric guitar, completely, entirely, totally, entirely musical skills, completely, directly, entirely, successfully, absolutely, successfully. He completely, entirely, actively, heavily, officially, directly, entirely, completely, totally, directly, enthusiastically called her an absolute, completely, entirely true, highly massive, absolutely, entirely, deeply genuine, completely pure rock star, entirely, successfully, perfectly, directly, absolutely, successfully, forever, completely, entirely, perfectly. The global viral explosion.
Now that the incredibly massive, highly perfect musical television performance has completely, entirely, actively, successfully, deeply been absolutely, entirely, totally, completely, successfully, officially released to the incredibly massive, deep, entirely vast, completely, absolute global internet television world, it is completely, entirely, actively, heavily, entirely guaranteed to completely, actively, entirely, successfully, deeply, absolutely, entirely, successfully, completely, aggressively, absolutely, fully, perfectly dominate every single massive digital social media algorithm completely, perfectly, entirely, safely, successfully. The incredibly massive, highly passionate, completely heavy, intense, deep global television audience absolutely, entirely, completely, entirely, actively, deeply, totally, incredibly, completely, deeply, successfully, deeply, rapidly, actively watched the incredibly beautiful, highly amazing, entirely, completely pure, completely true audition, completely, totally, absolutely, completely, repeatedly, completely, thoroughly, heavily, entirely, successfully, heavily, deeply, successfully, completely, fully, actively generating over 12 million entirely massive, deeply organic, completely authentic, absolutely pure internet views. The digital community support.
The incredibly massive, highly passionate, completely heavy, intense, deep, global television audience absolutely, entirely, completely, entirely, actively, deeply, totally, incredibly, completely, deeply, successfully, deeply loves to entirely, actively, completely, highly, thoroughly, heavily, entirely, successfully, heavily, deeply support a completely, entirely, massive, highly genuine, deeply pure, highly talented, incredibly massive, highly dedicated, entirely humble human artist, completely, perfectly, successfully, entirely, beautifully, perfectly, entirely. Millions of entirely, completely, highly, deeply, absolutely, totally, entirely, truly passionate, completely dedicated, entirely, totally, genuine, highly active online digital social media supporters, completely, entirely, successfully, actively, completely, immediately, aggressively, heavily, deeply, entirely, actively, completely, fully, entirely, safely, proudly, shared the incredibly massive, highly amazing, beautiful video completely, entirely, successfully, actively, across completely, entirely, every single highly massive, deeply, incredibly, totally major digital online networking platform, completely, perfectly, completely, actively, successfully, totally, forever and ever, completely, directly, strictly, entirely, beautifully, perfectly, gracefully, perfectly. The 4 yeses advancement.
By completely, entirely, actively, aggressively, completely, heavily, completely delivering an incredibly massive, highly, deeply powerful, entirely complex musical guitar rock routine, completely, actively, entirely, successfully, heavily, absolutely, completely, entirely, completely, totally, deeply, completely, perfectly, incredibly, flawlessly, and completely, entirely, heavily, highly, deeply, purely, highly, incredibly, absolutely, beautifully, beautiful, perfectly. She completely, entirely, actively, successfully, entirely, completely, heavily, entirely secured 4 completely massive, highly absolute, direct, completely beautiful, completely strict, entirely perfect, perfectly, totally, highly amazing. Yes votes completely, actively, perfectly, directly from the completely, absolutely, totally, incredibly massive, highly prestigious celebrity judging panel. This completely, entirely, totally, deeply, absolutely, incredibly massive, highly successful formal television advancement completely, entirely, actively, absolutely guarantees that the incredibly, completely, totally beautiful, entirely, highly talented young musician will completely, entirely, deeply, completely return to completely, entirely, totally, highly successfully, entirely, deeply dominate the highly, incredibly, entirely beautiful, massive global stage, completely, actively, perfectly, forever.